Chapter 31. Mazen. Mazen was still thinking about his shadow when he stepped through the gates to Ahmed bin Walid's residence. The guards did not bother leading him to the Diwan. Doubtless they trusted the High Prince to find his way there on his own. Paranoia tightened his lungs as he walked through the empty courtyard. He could not stop his gaze from wandering to his shadow. It looked like a normal shadow, but every time he nudged it with his foot, it caught against his boot. How is this possible? He considered the question as he wove through the evergreen garden. In the dark, the courtyard was beautiful and different. The trees seemed closer, as if they had moved to block his path, and the howl of the wind was strangely mournful. The moonlight filtering through the canopies was an eerie silver, and he found himself ducking through the trees to avoid it. He felt like he was being watched. He shook the thought away as he approached the Diwan steps. As his legs slowed and his eyes drooped and the world blurred, he had only just become aware of his sluggishness when a song, a soft, terrible song he recognized, spread through his mind. Mazen staggered. He did not realize he'd collapsed until he felt the softness of his shadow beneath his fingertips. He became aware of a sound, a thrumming in his arm, his feet, all around him. He paled. My shadow has a heartbeat. His stomach knotted with fear. Before he could pull his hand away, he felt blood dribbling down her lips as she coughed. How? She gasped as the knife was pulled from her shoulder. Gritting her teeth against the pain, she turned, hand over her gasping wound. She was stunned by the apparition before her. Impossible! She stepped back. You! I killed you! He had to be a mirage, a hallucination. He could not possibly be alive, not after she had suffocated his heart with magic. Not when she had watched the life fade from his eyes, not when every human in the Diwan had seen him collapse lifeless. And yet the hunter stood before her with his terrible black knife grinning. You killed the king of the 40 thieves? What a conceited notion. No, she stepped back. If she perished here, there would be no stopping him from making her into his slave. He would kill her, just as he had killed her beloved, and then he would steal her magic. Her eyes shifted to the shadows. What might be her final escape? But there was no running from the hunter. In moments, he was upon her, sinking his cursed dagger into her heart, and he was barely breathing as the vision of the shadow djinn faded. His world returned in all its starlit chaos. He could make out sounds from the present, the most recognizable of which was a voice. He had spent enough time despising its lulling cadence to know by heart, even if it was uncharacteristically soft. Ahmed. Mazen stumbled toward the stairs. Dark spots danced before his eyes, threatening to pull him back into a memory that was not his. Desperate, he reached for his rings. Heat shot through his fingers. It burned like hell, but it was enough to root him in the moment, to remind him of the uncharacteristic softness of Ahmed's voice. The Ahmed he knew did not speak in conspiratorial whispers. The Ahmed he knew did not abide silence. He shattered it. How many jinn have you killed? The wali said in his strange, stiff voice. Beneath his cadence was another voice, so soft it was barely audible. All so you could steal our magic and paint your world with our blood. Mazen stepped into the Diwan. Ahmed's guests lay on the floor, staring unresponsively at their surroundings. It appeared as if they had been in the middle of a feast, for food and drink lay scattered across the floor, staining the rich carpet and tile. Ahmed stood at the center of the mess, holding the merchant up by the collar of her robe. She was limp as a rag doll in his grasp. No more. The wali raised his hand. Mazen saw a flash of silver. Goodbye, jinn killer. Mazen did not think. He moved. One moment he was standing unseen at the Diwan entrance, and the next he'd tackled Ahmed to the ground. Ahmed lay stunned for a few moments, face paling as he took in Omar's sudden appearance. You, he choked. Mazen's eyes flitted to the scarf hanging loosely on the wali's neck, to the band of golden bones no longer concealed beneath it. He reached for the grimacing skulls, but before Mazen could grab the collar, Ahmed seized his wrist and wrenched it sharply to the side. Icy pain rippled through Mazen's arm. He bit back a yell as the wali threw him off. For a heartbeat he lay stunned on the floor, overwhelmed by the pain shooting through his bones. but then the adrenaline kicked in, and he was able to push himself up. It was just in time to watch a groggy-looking hunter approach Ahmed with a blade in hand. "Foul creature!" the hunter cried. "Leave the wally be!" Ahmed reached for one of his daggers as the man rushed toward him. Their blades met in an ear-piercing screech. The standstill lasted a heartbeat, too. Then Ahmed slid past the hunter's guard. The man lost his balance, and Ahmed used the opening to aim a hard kick at his legs. This time the hunter toppled, and the wali fell on him with the dagger. Mazen had been audience to mock battles before. He had watched palace soldiers cut flesh and draw blood as they outmaneuvered each other. But there was no artful tactics in this struggle. There was only life-ending defeat as Ahmed carved a crescent into the hunter's neck. The dying man's scream faded to a choked gurgle and then into a horrible broken wheeze as Ahmed rose to his feet. When he turned, his robe was drenched with blood. Mazen did not hear his own scream over the uproar that followed, but he felt it tear through his chest as he scrambled away from the gore. A yell on the other side of the diwan drew his attention, and he looked up to see another hunter, a grizzled man with scars on his face, come at the wali with a sword. Ahmed slid past his reach and plunged the dagger into the back of his neck as he swept past. The hunter toppled with a gasp, red bubbling at his lips. Immediately after, a pair of hunters came at Ahmed from either side of the diwan in a pincer movement. The wali sidestepped one man and lunged to catch the other's wrist mid-stab. There was a moment of shock as the hunter tried to free himself, but he was too slow. Ahmed threw him into his fellow, and the two collapsed in a heap. The wali stepped hard on one man's back, eliciting a crack so loud it could be heard over the yelling, and then he leaned down and, in one swift motion, slid a dagger out from his sleeve and plunged it into the other man's throat. Mazen watched the massacre unfold like a stunned spectator, barely breathing as Ahmed cut down hunter after hunter. He watched bones snap, bodies break, blood splatter, and all he could do was blink back panicked tears. If Ahmed turned on him, he would not be able to run. But the wali had eyes only for the men who faced him like warriors. The next opponent he confronted was the youngest Mazen had seen yet, a boy with determination sparkling in his round, frightened eyes. The boy and Ahmed faced each other over a corpse. The boy struck first. Ahmed parried. Their blades connected, slid, and clashed in mid-air. There was a moment Mazen's heart beat with frantic hope when the boy managed to catch Ahmed off guard and push him away. Ahmed stumbled as the boy raised his blade. The corpse beneath them shuddered. Mazen shot to his feet and yelled, "Watch out!" Too late. The corpse gripped the ankle of its still-living companion and pulled. The boy fell. Ahmed was prepared. He caught the youth in the chest with a purloined blade. By the time the boy hit the ground, his eyes were glazed over. Mazen crumpled against the wall, shaking with terror as an eerie silence washed over the diwan. The wali's eyes slid over him as he turned toward the remaining 6 hunters, surrounding him in a broken half-circle. At the sight of his blood-stained face, they stepped back, weapons drawn like shields. A twisted smile creased Ahmed's lips as he reached down and plucked a sword from one of the corpses. "What's wrong? I thought hunters did not fear death. Will none face me?" When no one rose to meet his challenge, the wali snorted and snapped his fingers. Like puppets yanked up by invisible strings, the corpses on the ground shambled to their feet, eyes glazed and unfocused. "Fine then. I will force you to look death in the eyes." The undead surged forward, and the hunters retreated into the forest. Mazen was numb, so numb that when Ahmed faced him, his legs would not move. Dread had frozen his limbs. "I thought you were brave," said the jinn wearing Ahmed's skin. "But you're a coward like the rest of them, aren't you?" He stepped forward. "Move," Mazen commanded his body. "Move, move." But it refused to obey him. Ahmed pulled his blade back and froze as the sound of a crackling fire suddenly filled the diwan. Luli al-Nazari had regained her footing. She stood behind them, holding up a dagger that was conspicuously on fire. She stepped forward, and Mazen saw the fire from her blade reflected in her eyes. "I don't know how you dug your claws into him, but the wali does not belong to you. Leave him be." "He does now." Ahmed matched the merchant's steps. When she sidestepped, he moved in the opposite direction, so that they were circling each other. "Leave him now, or I'll carve you out of him," she hissed. Ahmed blinked, laughed. "Foolish girl, you cannot exorcise me with fire." The merchant shot forward like an arrow, embers trailing in her wake. Ahmed caught her dagger with his sword, but though he stopped her blade, he could not deflect the fire, which spat and hissed and stretched toward him. He drew back with a growl as it scorched his wrist. "You might be immune to fire, but humans are not. You would hurt the man you want to save," Ahmed laughed. The sound was high-pitched, almost desperate. "You humans truly are heartless." No more heartless than a jinn who does not let the dead rest. The skirmish became a blur, a cacophony of metal shrieks. Ahmed was the superior fighter, but the merchant had fire. It burned brighter with each strike and then burst. Ahmed pulled back quickly enough to avoid the center of the blast, but the hem of his sleeve was burning so fiercely he had no choice but to lower his sword and focus on putting it out. Instinctively, Mazen reached for his shadow on the wall and draped it over his head as the wally drew closer. Out of sight, he finally relaxed enough to retreat. He noticed two things as he inched away. First, that though Ahmed's sleeve was aflame, his skin was unburned. It was as the merchant had said, magic fire distinguishes friend from foe. Second, the merchant was, impossibly, wielding her dagger with her injured hand. But those were fleeting realizations, ones Mazen forced away as the fight took an abrupt turn. Ahmed was no longer rushing toward the merchant, he was running away from her, taking the Dewan steps 2 at a time as she chased after him. "What are you waiting for?" the inner voice screamed between panicked palpitations of his heart. "You are the Stardust thief. You have to go after them." The voice was wrong. He was not his brother, the fearless Jinn hunter. He was Mazen, the coward prince, and every fiber of his being was screaming at him to run. But when he tried to run, tried to move, he saw blood splattered on the floor and froze, heart rising into his throat. He clenched his fists, forced himself to breathe out. There didn't need to be any more killing, he just had to get the collar off Ahmed's neck. He forced himself to move, to follow the sound of battle into the cluster of trees that formed the jinn-made forest. Adrenaline pushed him forward, through the trees with twisted, sharpened branches, and past the skirmishes between the living and the dead. Every fight was a desperate clash. The living fought to stay alive, while the dead single-mindedly sought to kill. Watching the fighting made Mazen feel as if he were in the middle of some morbid, deadly dance, one where everyone but him knew the steps. He ran into the next clearing so fast he nearly put himself in the center of Ahmed and Luli's fight. He just barely dodged the merchant's strike as she carved a flaming arc through the air. It was evident from the way she moved that her strength was flagging. No sooner had Mazen thought this than she stumbled and Ahmed raised his sword. Mazen said a prayer to the gods and threw himself at Ahmed, feeling the shadow slide from his shoulders as he grabbed the man from behind. Had Mazen been in his own body, Ahmed would have easily been able to throw him off, but beneath Omar's weight he stumbled. "Grab the collar," cried Mazen, as the wali gasped beneath his grasp. "How did you—" The merchant blinked, then waved her flaming dagger at him. "You grab the collar, you're the one strangling him." By the time Mazen thought to get his fingers around the wali's throat, Ahmed had regained his footing and heaved him back into a tree. The impact drove the air from Mazen's lungs. He collapsed to the ground, breathing hard as the wali turned. When he lunged, Mazen ducked sideways, but Ahmed's sword still sliced across his shoulder, cutting fabric and flesh. Mazen yelled in pain before he could help it. "You are an abomination," Ahmed hissed. When Luli rushed toward him, he deftly turned and deflected her strike. "It is because of humans like you that my people suffer. Because of you that they are slaves, even beyond the grave." He shoved the merchant away, or tried to. The fire on her dagger flared, and Ahmed was forced to pull back. Mazen put a hand to his wound and felt blood beneath his fingers. Though the cut stung, it was thankfully just a flesh wound. The pain was unimportant. He rose to his feet, drew a blade, and ran at Ahmed. He and the merchant both missed. Ahmed stepped back, a triumphant grin on his face. That was when Mazen heard a rustle in the trees, saw movement in the shadows. Before Ahmed could turn, a figure darted into the clearing and jumped him from behind. Mazen recognized her voice, even pitched into a scream. In combat, the scowl on Aisha bint Luwas's face was lethal as a knife. Mazen saw it only briefly before she pinned Ahmed to the ground and clawed at his neck. Aisha, Mazen said, breathless. He approached slowly, hand over his injury. Aisha paused, collar in her hands, eyes cloudy. Mazen rushed toward her. She startled when he grabbed at the collar. It was that moment of surprise that allowed him to pull the relic away. He threw it at the merchant, who barely caught it before it fell. "Keep it," he wheezed. "I expect you to neutralize it however you see fit." An eerie silence hung over them, punctuated only by the harsh sound of their breathing. Aisha looked at Mazen, Mazen looked at Luli, Luli looked at the collar, face ashen. And then there was a sound. A shuddering inhale from Ahmed, who was crying. "I'm sorry," he said, voice laced with such shame Mazen had to look away. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." It was the merchant who went to him first, who tried to console him when the other hunters arrived covered in blood and grime. It was she who walked with him when the guards took him away. Aisha was about to follow when she noticed Mazen holding his shoulder. "It's fine," he said weakly. "Only a flesh wound. I'll catch up with you in a moment." Aisha turned away without another word. It was not until she and everyone else left that the numbness faded and Mazen was finally able to consider his injury. He pulled his hand away and looked at the blood. He blinked again and again, but the impossible sight did not vanish. His blood was black.